A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm. Thank you. So now we come to the portion of the conservation measures, the various different measures which have been adopted in order to bring about a conservation of the biodiversity. So here we shall be making ourselves familiar with what do we understand by the biosphere reserves, what do we understand, or what is the principle behind the aspect of the Wildlife Act also is something that we will take a look into. And then we will also be talking about the various different aspects of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. We'll take a look at a couple of examples, the marine protected areas. So those are the regions that we are going to take a look into. Now here, when we talk about it, first of all, the conservation measure. So the entire aspect of conservation of wildlife was brought into discussion, was brought into relevance by the declaration of the National Policy of Wildlife Conservation, which dates back to 1970. So this was one of the first policy documents to bring about a concerted effort for the conservation of wildlife. But then it was the Wildlife Act of 1972 that added weightage to the process of conservation, and the conservation legislation that is covered by the details of the Wildlife Act 1972. Now, when we talk about the process of conservation, the principle of the process of conservation, so that principle revolves around two basic aspects. One is the in situ method of conservation, and another is the ex situ method of conservation. So when we say the in situ method of conservation, what do we mean by that? What is meant by the ex situ conservation? Okay, before that, let me tell you that tomorrow we won't be having the environment lecture. The portions which are left to tomorrow, you will have the compulsory language. The portions which would be left over after today would be covered next Saturday. Okay, I would repeat, tomorrow you won't have the environment session. Tomorrow you will have the compulsory language paper. The portions of environment which would be left over after today will be taken up for discussion on Saturday. That is next Saturday. We will complete those portions. Now, coming back to the principle of conservation. So when we say in situ conservation, so here conservation of the species is carried out in the region where you find them, in the region where they are to be found. Okay, so there only conservation takes place. So conservation is carried out in the region where the species are originally found. So example, you have the case of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves. So these will come into the category of the conservation to be carried out in the exact area where the species are to be naturally found, where they are organically to be found. So that is your in situ, where you don't need the transfer of species. Then you have the ex situ mode of conservation. Ex situ method of conservation is where you end up transporting the species, transferring the species from one region to another in order to carry out a concerted method for conservation. So primarily for conservation purposes, you end up transferring those species. So you have the ex situ. So that is where the conservation is carried out in specific areas or regions where the species are transferred for the process. So here what can we have as the examples? The examples that we can have from this particular portion can be your zoos. Then you can have gene banks. We can have botanical gardens. Then, for example, you can also have the case of aquariums. Okay, in all these regions, you will find that the species have been particularly transferred for the process of conservation. The species are not naturally found in these areas, but they have been brought into that area to create a public awareness in certain cases, or to conserve or preserve them and preserve their diversity for a longer run. So this is the principle. Now, let us introduce ourselves to the concepts of wildlife sanctuaries, what they are, what do we understand by the national parks, and we'll take a few examples along the process as well. So when we say wildlife sanctuaries, so these are naturally occurring areas that are meant to protect the endangered species from hunting, poaching, and predation. Right? Human activities like harvesting of timber, collecting minor forest products, and private ownership rights, they are allowed as long as they do not interfere in the well-being of the various organisms or animals in particular. So human activities to some extent are allowed. Okay, so human activities are allowed to some extent. Okay, then this entire protection by the wildlife sanctuaries, by creation of wildlife sanctuaries, it gains its legitimacy, it gains its power from the Wildlife Act 1972. Now, ideally, it is the state government which can declare a particular region as a wildlife sanctuary, but sometimes, under certain conditions, even the central government has got the power to declare a region as a wildlife sanctuary. So, under certain conditions, the central government can also declare an area as a wildlife sanctuary. Okay. Generally, you will find that the wildlife sanctuaries which are there, the wildlife sanctuaries which are present, now you will observe that these wildlife sanctuaries, they have been created for the conservation or protection of a particular species. So mostly they are species oriented. They are targeted towards the conservation of a particular species to be found in that region. Okay, so in most of the cases. Now there are around 567 existing wildlife sanctuaries in India, covering more than 1,22,000 square kilometer, which is 3.73% of the geographical area of the country. Now, all those of us who have the ambition to learn all the wildlife sanctuaries, I would just say good luck to all of you. But I would also suggest to you, please don't learn the wildlife sanctuaries. Whenever you take a look at the current affairs, the species which has been in news in the past year, the areas or the wildlife sanctuaries where you can find those particular specific species, only those needs to be looked into, not all of them. So example of wildlife sanctuaries, if you can take a look into, so that is the Pobitora Wildlife Sanctuary is one of them. Now, Pobitora is situated in between the region of Buramayong on one side and the region of the Brahmaputra Plains. And this has got a very high density of rhino population. It is situated in the state of Assam, and it has got a very high density of the rhino population in that area. And that is why it is also said that if you want to really take a look at a lot of these rhinos, now earlier the traditional area to venture out would be Kaziranga. But now it is said that if you really want to take a look, then you can take a look into Pobitora. Pobitora is where you will have the easy sighting for the rhinos. So it is on the southern bank of Brahmaputra, and it is between Buramayong on one side and the Brahmaputra on the other side. Now, here you will find various different migratory birds, golden jackals, rhesus monkeys, rhesus macaque rather, barking deer or the munyak, Indian leopard, and one-horned rhino, with its one of the highest populations across the whole world. Now, under the Indian Rhino Vision 2020, Indian Rhino Vision, with a target to be achieved by 2020, it was a joint program of the Department of Environment and Forest, Government of Assam, World Wildlife Fund India, and the International Rhino Foundation and the US Fish and Wildlife Sanctuaries. 6 rhinos were translocated from Pobitora and reintroduced into the Manas area. Earlier also it was carried out where from Pobitora to Manas there has been a shifting of rhinos, because we have also talked about that how in the region of Pobitora the density is very high, the population is in general very, very high in this case. So that is the case of the Pobitora Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, when we talk about the Indian Rhino Vision, what is that? So basically, it was launched in way back in 2005. Now, it was an effort to attain a wild population of at least 3,000 greater one-horned rhinos spread over the 7 protected areas in the Indian state of Assam by the year 2020. So across all these 7 protected areas, the overall population that was targeted was close to around 3,000. Now, the 7 protected areas, which are they? So you have the Kaziranga, Pobitora, Orang, Manas, Lakhova, Bura Pachori, and also Dibru Saikova. So you have Burachapori, the region also teeming significantly with the rhino population. Pobitora is already teeming with a lot of rhino population. So that is where in that entire area, the target was to achieve the 3,000 figure. Now, last year, as it was announced by the Assam government, that figure of 3,000 individual rhinos that has been attained, that has been achieved. So now you have in total around more than 3,000 rhinos situated and present in the state of Assam. Now, then we take the case of the Korenga Wildlife Sanctuary, which is situated in the Godavari Deltaic stretch. So it is a stunning mangrove forest and estuary located 22 kilometers away from the Kakinada beach of Andhra Pradesh. And the mangrove is developed at the confluence of Godavari and the Bay of Bengal. So in the deltaic stretch of the Godavari. Deltaic stretches of Godavari. Okay, it is home to 24 species of mangrove trees and over species of 120. So wherever you will have a lot of mangrove vegetation, There you will end up finding significant amount of bird population as well. Fish population in case of coastal mangroves is also very high. But otherwise also in inland areas which are not on the coastline, wherever, for example, you take the case of sacred groves, there also the population of birds is something which is always correlated with the density of the mangrove. So amongst numerous bird breeds, critically endangered long-billed vulture and white-backed vulture, they are something which you can always have a look at. Then you have the Dandeli Wildlife Sanctuary. Where is it situated? So it is situated in the Uttar Kannada district of Karnataka. Sanctuary covers a total area of a massive 866 kilometers square. Now, along with the neighboring Anshi National Park, that Dandeli Anshi region was declared as a tiger reserve. So you had the Anshi Dandeli Tiger Reserve, which was declared. And it is basically famous for the great hornbill. So hornbill is something that you find in this region, the Malabar pied hornbill. And here, it is the only known tiger reserve in India to have the very frequent sighting of the elusive black panther. Now, black panther is something which is not easily sighted in the wild. So that black panther is something that you can take a look into. It is known to house the Indian sloth bear. Indian sloth bear is something which is a commonality across the southern stretches of the Western Ghats as well. It is something of a commonality in the region around the Nilgiris as well. So sloth bear, the Indian pangolin, the giant Malabar squirrel, the dhole, the Indian jackal, and the muntyak, all of them you will find. A dhole is the wild dog that you have. The wild dog species that is referred to as the dhole. Okay. Then when we talk about national parks, so they are the areas that also protect the natural environment. They are also involved in public recreation and enjoyment activities. In the national park, the landscape and its flora and fauna are present in their natural state. So as I told you, in the case of the wildlife sanctuary, it is a particular species that is oftentimes targeted for conservation. Whereas when we talk about a national park, the entire landscape, the various different aspects and the constituents of biodiversity, all of them, they are targeted for the conservation process and the conservation measure to be carried on. So, national park, here you will always find a greater amount of restriction and more stringent protection measures as compared to a wildlife sanctuary. So, in the case of national parks, greater amount of protection is carried out as compared to a wildlife sanctuary. Okay, you have a greater level of protection which is carried out. Now, the Wildlife Act of 1972, which provided a kind of a legitimacy for the establishment of national park, now that is also the one which is at play in order to protect. Or the Wildlife Act is something which gives you the legitimacy for both wildlife sanctuaries as well as national park. Now, here also, under certain conditions, it is the central government which can also declare a region as a wildlife sanctuary. But here also, the degree of protection in general is greater. So both are declared by the state government, but in certain conditions, central government. So remember that both wildlife sanctuary and national park, when we talk about both of them, wildlife sanctuary and national park, now both of these, you will observe a commonality, that is both of them are driven by the Wildlife Act 1972, right? both of them declared by the state government under certain conditions by central government as well. They can be declared under certain conditions even by the central government. Okay. Now, these are few of the national parks which are there. So the Haley National Park is the first national park in India. Now, where is this Haley National Park and what is it known as today? What is the name by which we know the Haley National Park as of today? Can we have a guess? Any kind of clue? Yes, correct. And what was the name? What is the name of it now? It is the very good. It is the Corbett. It is the Jim Corbett National Park. That is what it is known as. So the Jim Corbett National Park was one of the first national parks which was established. It is presently in the state of Uttarakhand. So you have various different national parks which are out there. So this is a listing of the national parks as per the map, but obviously you would not be able to figure out much from here. What I would rather suggest to you is that there also rely on the same website, that is wiinvest.nic.in for the detailed list. Okay, and here take a look at the fresh the current editions, current affairs, or recent additions which have happened. So the recent additions which have happened, those need to be taken a detailed and in-depth look at. Now then you have, for example, you have the case of the Kaziranga National Park. Now Kaziranga National Park, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is located in the northeastern part of India along the floodplains of Brahmaputra River. So this is also one of those national parks that you would frequently encounter in news whenever you hear about the flooding of River Brahmaputra, which always happens almost every year. You experience a widespread flooding which happens or which plagues the region of Brahmaputra plains. So there many of the animals in this region, many of the organisms in this region, they are impacted by the floods. So every year when the Brahmaputra swells and floods, when in many of the cases, many of the deers, few of the rhinos, etc., they are the casualties which are claimed in this. Okay, so it features wetlands, grasslands, and forests, and that is where the biodiversity is significant. So this is where you'll find tiger, elephant, all of them, leopard, swamp deer. Now, rhinos in general, if you consider the range areas where the rhinos would traditionally be found across the country, not the present condition, but traditionally and historically, they would be found across the entire Tarai belt. The entire Tarai belt, that is to the northern part of Uttar Pradesh, some parts of Uttarakhand, in the region of northern Bihar, southern part of the entirety of the Nepalese area, then northern part of West Bengal and also Assam. In that entirety of the stretch, the rhinos would very naturally be found. But obviously, as we have discussed, they have been hunted in very large numbers for their horns, the rhino horns. And by the way, I hope you are aware of this fact that the rhino horns, they are basically made up of what? They are made up of very thick hair particles. So that is what makes up those rhino horns. So it is for those rhino horns that they have been poached in large quantities. Now, over a period of time, the measures taken by various organizations such as Traffic, Savin, etc., they have analyzed the behavior of the poachers, the pattern of poaching and hunting which is carried out, and also as you make the local population a stakeholder in the entire process of conservation, by that you are also able to bring the poaching to a stop, because the local population oftentimes serves as a perfect guide. They will guide the poachers that where is it that the population is significantly higher. So that is why we have discussed in the portion of CBD as well, that the fair and equitable benefit sharing arising out of the genetic diversity, there you have to make the local population a participant in conservation. Once you do that, then the conservation is much more meaningful, much more long lasting as well. So, based on the latest census conducted, you had around close to around 2413 rhinos in the park. But in 1905, the rhino population was reduced to only 12 individuals. So, from 12, in around 100 years, we have seen a kind of a remarkable turn back, or a remarkable changing of scenario, where due to massive raising of awareness and the strict norms created by the various legislations, we have managed a greater amount of conservation to be carried out. Then we have the Bandhavgarh National Park. Now, Bandhavgarh is situated in Madhya Pradesh. It is here that you will find large healthy population of leopards, deer such as cheetal, sambar, barking deer, and you will also find, for example, chinkara, sambar, nilgai, and langur. So obviously, when you have a large variety of herbivores, the carnivore population will also come thriving. So you will find significant carnivore population as well. Now, in this area, you will also observe, when we say the Bandhav, so here you will also find the white tigers to be found here. Now, these white tigers, their coloration is white because of the pigmentation process, because of the melanin. It is not as if they are of a different genetics altogether. It is basically where you will observe that there has been pigmentation happening, and you have it is like the albino tigers of sorts. So this is, the coloration is white. Coloration is white due to the pigmentation. Okay, the pigmentation process which happens. Now, then you have the Bandipur National Park. This protected area at one point of time would serve the purpose of conservation, or as a kind of a hunting ground for the royals of Mysore. So they would come to the region of Bandipur in order to carry out the process of hunting. Now, this Bandipur has got a variation of vegetation from the region, or from the kind of a grassland in certain areas. It would also have a kind of deciduous forest. Dry deciduous and grassland is something which dominates in this particular region. So here, when you talk about the vegetation, you will come across dry deciduous and grasslands. Okay, that is something that you find in significant quantity here. So, located in the southern state of Karnataka, it was once the hunting ground for the Maharaja of Mysore. In 1974 is when the Indian government did launch Project Tiger. And that Project Tiger, which was initially launched in 1973 itself. Project Tiger was launched at that point itself, but Bandipur Tiger Reserve was, or the conservation of tigers in Bandipur, that became one of the prime attraction for the tourists as well. Now, this region of Bandipur, it is a part of the larger Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, and it becomes one of the large protected areas and the largest protected areas in the southern part of the country. It is one of the largest protected areas that we have. Now, it shares its boundary with three other national parks, that is Nagarhole, Wayanad, and Mudumalai. So that is where it serves as a very vital wildlife corridor, tiger corridor and wildlife corridor. For all the various species who try to move from the region of the western to the eastern Ghats and vice versa, this also ends up serving as a very vital wildlife corridor. Very vital wildlife corridor. Corridor between the eastern and the western Ghats. Okay. So that is what is observed in general. So here also you will find one of the largest habitats for wild elephants, one of the largest, not the absolute largest. Then we come across the marine protected areas. That is, these are those protected areas where the purpose is the conservation of the marine organisms. So this can include the coastal terrain, the coastal area, the intertidal region, the island region, and pure aquatic areas as well. So you have to understand that you can have certain national parks and wildlife sanctuaries included within these marine protected areas itself. Okay. So you can have some amount of, within a large marine protected area, you can have the different wildlife sanctuaries and national parks constituted within them. So as per IUCN, this is the definition of the marine protected area. But as I always maintain, in many of the cases, definitions are meant to confuse you rather than to clarify the meaning. So just take a look at it. This is the ideal depiction of it. So any area of intertidal or subtidal terrain. Intertidal means that the region which is covered in between. So if this is the normal level of water, now if here you have the level which is attained by high tide, here you have a level which is attained by low tide. So this is the region which will be referred to as the intertidal. Intertidal. Okay. So it is the intertidal terrain divided into three categories. Category 1, the categorization is done. So these are those protected areas having entire areas in the intertidal or subtidal zone, the mangroves, the coral reefs, creeks, estuaries, lagoons, etc. So in that entire region, that is put under or included under category 1. Category 2, island regions. The regions, when we talk about the island areas, so these will include Andamans and Nicobar. Now, these islands are very rich in biodiversity and mangrove population as well as Lakshadweep. In these areas. Then you have category 3A. These will include the sandy beaches beyond the intertidal line, right? So even those sandy beaches, they require conservation. For example, we'll take the example of that as well. That where is it that the sandy beaches require conservation? We'll take the case of the Gahir Matha region in Odisha. Then you have the category 3B, includes evergreen or semi-evergreen forests of these island areas. So they are also vitally important. So this is the categorization as per the MPA. So here are few of the marine protected areas of the country. So you will observe, for example, you have, if you take the case Gahir Matha. Now Gahir Matha is situated in the region of Odisha. Now this Gahir Matha is famous for what? It is famous for the large scale presence of the olive ridley turtles. The olive ridley turtles, they come in large quantities in this area in order to carry out mass nesting exercise, where in large quantities they come, they lay their eggs and they go swim back. Now, that is the mass nesting activity of olive ridley turtles. That is what is also referred to as Aribada. So you have witnesses, this region witnesses mass nesting by olive ridley turtles. That mass nesting which is carried out. This is what is also referred to as aribada. Now, when you have the mass nesting of turtles, basically, they will lay their eggs, cover it with sand, and they will go back. Right? Now, that means this sandy area, if you carry out enough amount of human activities, now then you will observe that in these sandy areas, the eggs can get basically prematurely hatched or they can get destroyed. So that means the fresher population will be at risk, right? And also in these sandy areas, what used to be done is that once we found out that there is this mass nesting exercise, obviously a lot of people throng to that area. And when you have a lot of people thronging to that region, then with the help of those large amount of light masts that you have, flashlights, etc., they would be consistently lit up in these beaches. It was later found out that these artificial lights, was rather creating a nuisance and lot of turtle deaths. Why? Because when the egg hatches and the new young one is born with no ideal support, where to go, what to do, etc., that young one follows the light of the sun and automatically is driven towards the sea, right? But then when you have these artificial lights, that is when many of the times they are the ones who are forced out to come above the sand even during night time. And then rather than going towards the sea, they are driven towards these artificial lights. And it is at that point, now these are the ones who might have hatched only few hours back. So obviously, when it comes to the amount of strength, that is almost absent. It is negligible. So that is when these young ones, they get damaged or they get dehydrated and they die within a few minutes. So that is why all these areas, the artificial lights have been completely uprooted in order to ensure a safe mass nesting and a safe hatching process. Every year, the forest officials in the region, they track this hatching exercise to ensure that the hatching goes ahead without any issues whatsoever. Now, in area of Andhra Pradesh also, you will observe that around the region of Rushikulya also, you have this kind of hatching which does take place. Okay, but greater number does happen in the region of Kahirbatha. Then, for example, when you consider the Bhitarkanika region, now Bhitarkanika region is one of the areas which has got large amount of, very high amount of mangrove population. This is also the area where you will find the availability of crocodiles, the large crocodile species. Okay, so mangrove population across the eastern coastline after Sundarbans is to be found in one of the largest density. So very large mangrove population. In India, the largest mangrove population is situated in Sundarbans. Then when we talk about, let's say, another one, let's suppose we talk about the Malvan Marine Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, it is situated off the coastline of Maharashtra. It is where you have a greater diversity of the marine species. And more particularly, here you will also find significant amount of coral population. So, coral population is also to be found here. Significant diversity of corals. Okay, so that is something that you find. Koringa is something that we have already studied, right? Now, when you talk about the region of Andaman Nicobar Islands, there you have the Great Nicobar. Now, there also it is a kind of a marine protected area. Now, in the region of Great Nicobar, you will find the leatherback turtles. So, leatherback turtles, they are the largest turtle species, one of the largest turtle species across the world. So, they come for the nesting and the hatching exercise. So that is when they come to the tropical waters. Otherwise, they will swim away to the cooler waters in general. So when we talk about the Great Nicobar, There you will find leatherback turtles. There you will also end up finding the presence of, let's say, dugong. Mangroves are obviously to be found. So that is where, because of greater amount of diversity presence, the marine protected areas, they need significant conservation. Then we come to the concept of the biosphere reserves. So what do we mean by biosphere reserves and what is their importance? So first of all, understand the genesis of it. Understand the genesis of the biosphere reserve. Now, while conservation was being carried out and is being carried out across the globe by various different measures, legislations have been brought about, you have certain protected regions, you have animals being transferred to zoos, etc. It was understood around 40 years back itself and 50 years back itself that conservation can never be lasting if you do not have the proper or the proper role played by the local community. And it was understood that when you have or when you carry out conservation, if you alienate the local community completely, then there is no point of conserving that diversity. Because biodiversity is what? It is not a museum out there. It is not a zoo that you are creating in the name of biodiversity. Biodiversity means you have in one larger stretch the organisms, the nature in itself, the nature and man relationship that is at its pristine best state. So that is what you have to ensure to carry out conservation. That is when UNESCO, it launched the program which is referred to as the Man and Biosphere Program. So this was launched by basically UNESCO. Okay, so that is basically something that was added by UNESCO. So Man and Biosphere Program, this talks about the relevance of having the role of the local community, the role of sustainable lifestyle in ensuring the conservation of the biosphere. So these are the largest protected areas. If you consider them by size, then basically the biosphere reserves, they will end up forming one of the largest protected areas, much larger than the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. So can include last year Kijaria Wildlife Sanctuary was added to what? What is the question that you're getting at, Asif? So can include multiple national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. Wildlife sanctuaries within its boundary. Okay, this talks about the ban and biosphere program. So you have around 18 biosphere reserves in India, which is the largest biosphere reserve that we have in our country. Do we have any clue about that? The largest biosphere reserve that we have, the shortest one that we have. Okay. No, it is not the Nilgiri. The largest one is the Run of Kutch. Run of Kutch is the, yes, Saurabh, correct. So Run of Kutch is the largest biosphere reserve. And the smallest one is the Dibru Saikhowa. So the largest biosphere reserve is the Kutch Biosphere Reserve. So largest reserve in India. Yes, Kijaria was added to the Ramsar Convention. Not the wildlife sanctuary was not added to the Ramsar Convention. Kijaria wetland was added to the Ramsar Convention, Asif. Okay, so largest reserve is basically And please understand, if you say that Khijadia has been added to wetland, that will be an incorrect statement to make. Khijadia has a very large wetland. That Khijadia wetland has been added to the Ramsar Convention. There are many wetlands in the country which have not been listed in the Ramsar Convention for conservation. Okay, so keep that in mind. So that is the Kutch Biosphere Reserve. And the smallest one is the Dibru-Saikho one. So Man and Biosphere Program, it talks about the sustainability of living, or rather coexistence between man and nature. Okay, so what are the criterias based upon which a region is declared as a biosphere reserve? So first of all, the primary criteria is the site must contain an effectively protected or minimally disturbed core area of value of nature conservation. Now this is the area where you can carry out significant amount of research. Research activities are carried out in the larger area in order to understand the life scale of the various organisms, in order to understand the requirements of the various different species, what are the conditions that they require in order to survive. So all those, they are carried out in the biosphere reserve. So when a region is declared as a biosphere reserve, it is kept in mind that it should have adequate spacing for all these activities to be carried on. So should include additional land for and water suitable for research and demonstration of sustainable methods of management of biosphere as well. So structure of the biosphere reserve basically is again three-tiered, where you will observe that you have a minimally disturbed, core zone surrounded by a larger buffer zone, and then you have a much larger transition zone. Okay, so that is how it goes. So this is where no significant activities are allowed. This is the core area. This is the buffer zone, where some activities are allowed, sustainable activities, as long as they are sustainable. So buffer zone. In this, researches can also be carried out. This is the core area is completely undisturbed. Buffer zone, sustainable agriculture can be carried out, sustainable process of water harvesting, etc., can be carried out. Researches can be carried out, various observation experiments can be carried out, and then you have a transition zone. Now, that transition zone is the zone which differentiates the dense human vegetation or the dense human population from the region of these protected areas. So that is the difference creator. Okay, so it is a part of the reserve where the greatest activity, human activity, is permitted to promote economic and human development that is sustainable. Because after all, the entire principle of MAB, or Man and Biosphere Reserve, is driven from the basic factor of sustainable coexistence. Okay, so here you have the few of the biosphere reserves in India. So you have cool desert in the region of Ladakh. So Nanda Devi, Kanchenjunga, Manas, Nokrik, Dibru-Saikho, this is the smallest. This is the largest. This is something. Now, biosphere reserves are not very large in number, so you can always keep that in mind. Okay. Now we come to the portion of Project Tiger, for which we have recently celebrated 50 years for the completion of Project Tiger. So that is something we'll take a look at. Before that, let's take a 7 minutes or 7 to 8 minutes break, and then we will push on to the end of the session. Okay, so let's take a break of 7 minutes, and we'll be back. 7 to 10 minutes, we'll be back. So now we come over to the portion of Project Tiger. Now, Project Tiger was basically launched, as the name in itself tells you, to conserve the species of tigers. Now, here in India, at one point of time, now in India, which genetic variety of tiger do we find? We find the Royal Bengal tiger. You have various different genetic varieties of tiger, ranging from the Amur tiger to the case of the Caspian tiger, to the case of the Royal Bengal tiger. So you have various genetic varieties. You have the extinct Tasman tiger. You have the very rare, whose sighting is also very, very rare, and that is the Sumatran tiger. So these are the various different varieties. Now, the Indian landscape at one point of time was dominant with the tiger population. But because of hunting and hunting due to leisurely activities, their population started declining quite substantially. Now, in around 1970s, that is around 1972-73, at that point of time when the population was estimated, it came out to be a very lowly figure of 1400. So that is when in 73 you had the launching of Project Tiger, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the that time Prime Minister, she made it a point that the message is spread across the country that conservation is the need of the hour. Now here, Project Tiger was launched. You have various different areas which were designated as the region of the tiger reserves over a period of time. But then the census exercise, the tiger census exercise, that started being carried out. Now, the tiger census exercise was initiated in around 2006 to get an idea about the tiger population. So, the census exercise was carried out, census was carried out in 2006 as a part of Project Tiger. Now, this census is carried every 4 years. Carried out every 4 years. Every 4 years, you carry out this census exercise. Now, here it was carried out in 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018, and then latest is 2022. So, till now, you have had 5 different census exercise which have been carried out in the various different areas. Now, in the entirety of the world, it is not only restricted to India, but tigers are also to be found in the various different regions of the world. Now, these are solitary animals. Solitary animals means they don't live in large groups. Unlike the case of the lions, you would have heard about the pride of lions, right? Not the proud aspect of pride, but the pride as in the group of lions. So lions, they do move in groups, they do exist in groups, but tigers, they don't. When they grow up, that is when you will find that they have their requirement of the own territory. They do mark their own territory, and for an adult tiger, the territory can be as large as maybe even 100 square kilometer for one individual tiger, or even in certain cases 150 square kilometer can be the size of that territory that the tiger requires. Why? Now, that is because for these canine species or these species of predators, now the availability of food is a must, and competition is not something that they deeply cherish. So, here for the tigers, they do require a large area, because out of 10 times that they go out to hunt, the success rate is only around 20%. That means every 10 times that they go out to hunt, they will be able to catch that prey maybe twice or at max once. So in rest of the cases, they have to do without any kind of food. So that is where they do require the availability of large amount of herbivore population. So that is why they require a very large space as well. Now, these tigers, their numbers, they started declining, and when you had a census carried out in 2006, the number at this point of time was as low as 1411. So it was almost similar for the 40-year time span, almost. That is in 72 also it was around 1400. In 2006 also it was around the same range. So that caused a lot of alarm. And that alarm was created because if the tiger population is not increasing, means they any kind of adverse circumstance, disease, any adverse scenario can lead to a substantial decline in population thereof. So that is where the conservation measures were further strengthened. Now, the tiger range countries. What are the tiger range countries? So, tiger range countries are those countries where traditionally that has been a home to the tiger population. Tigers in general from the region of Russia, some part of Central Asia, then in the portion of eastern part of Asia, that is where the tigers population has been found. India presently houses more than 75% of the global population of tigers, because the current numbers as per the latest census is estimated to be somewhere around the figure of 3167. So around the figure of 3100. That is the estimated figure of the tiger population now. Roughly around 3167. Okay. So the population has significantly and substantially increased. And this has been a result of the success of Project Tiger. Now, while the tiger population across the tiger range countries, they are increasing, other than the regions such as Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Now, in these areas, the tiger population has declined. It has reduced to almost zero in few of these particular regions. So that is where the conservation methods and the presence of ideal habitat, conservation of the wildlife, that has led to a substantial and sharp increase in the tiger population for the past few decades in India. So here, Government of India launched Project Tiger with the aim of saving the steadily declining population of tigers in India in 1973. And the chief objective of the Project Tiger is what? Reduce factors that cause the diminishing of tiger habitats and manage them. And this does also include, by the way, of managing the invasive alien species of plants. For example, Lantana camara is one of the ideal cases of that. So when you have the various different species of these invasive alien plants, now these are not palatable, these are not consumed by the herbivore. So the herbivore population starts to experience a decline. When the herbivore population reduces, when that experiences a sudden and a sharp decline, then obviously the availability of food for the tigers also reduces. And also to ensure a viable tiger population for scientific, ecological, economic, aesthetic, and cultural value. Now, the administrating body for the Project Tiger is the NTCA, National Tiger Conservation Authority. Now, that is the apex organization which keeps a track of the Project Tiger. And if you have to, let's say, tinker with the area of the Project Tiger, if you have to increase the area, decrease the area of a Project Tiger, a prior approval by NTCA is a must. To add some weightage and teeth into NTCA's own activities, here basically it was added a kind of a statutory status. So the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 was amended in 2006 to provide a statutory status to the NTCA. Okay. Now, the tiger reserves, here also you will have the same concept of the concentric areas. So the core zone is the undisturbed region, right? This is the undisturbed area critical for wildlife. Okay. And the buffer zone, where some amount of other activities are carried out, even for tourism purposes, safaris, etc. You are never allowed an entry into the core zone unless and until you have cleared the forest services examination. Then whenever you want, you can go into the core zone. Then basically you are the safekeeper of the forest in itself. Okay. So here, These are the list of the tiger reserves in India that you have. Basically, now we have 53 tiger reserves in total. So, in the case of the tiger reserves, their number is not very much. So, I would always suggest to you that take a look at the various different states, the states and the tiger reserves which are present in those states. That should suffice. Okay, you should be aware of these areas. Now, here, when we talk about the tiger reserves, if I tell you the areas of spread, where so you will observe the significant amount of tiger in the Shivalik region, in the Shivalik and the plain areas. That is where you will find the tiger population to exist. Okay, so here, for example, you have the Corbett, you have the Rajaji Tiger Reserve, you also have the Dudhwa Tiger Reserve, then you have Pilibhit Tiger Reserve. Here you have the Valmiki Tiger Reserve, Buksa Tiger Reserve. So these are the tiger reserves. Then you will have a significant chunk of them situated in the portion of the central deciduous areas, right from the region of the Amarkantak spreading across to the region of the Dandakaranya. Then you will have a tiger reserve in, or the significant concentration of tiger reserve situated in the region of the Nilgiri. So these are the dense areas of tiger population, okay, where the density of tiger population is significantly higher. Okay, so these are your various reserves. Now, many of these tiger reserves will also have the other species, such as the presence of elephants, the presence of rhinos. In many of the cases, they can also be found. Sloth bears in the case of the Nilgiris in southern part of India. Then we come to the St. Petersburg Declaration, which was a part of the Global Tiger Framework to increase the tiger population across the tiger range countries. So, tiger range countries, as we have talked about, you have 13 various different countries where tigers are naturally to be found. So, here the 13 tiger range countries are Bangladesh, Bhutan, Cambodia, India, China, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nepal, Russia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So while the population of tiger has been increasing almost in all of these countries other than the East Asian nations. So here a question can be framed that globally the tiger population is increasing across all countries. That will be an incorrect statement to make. So the tiger population is increasing in all the range countries barring the East Asian nations, like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Okay, so that is where it is decreasing. Otherwise, even in China, there has been an increase. Even in the case of Russia, there has been an increase, but the most substantial increase has happened in India. So, this St. Petersburg Declaration was a part of the International Tiger Conservation Forum, which was held in the St. Petersburg, Russia in 2010. So, this was held as a part of GTF, Global Tiger Framework. Okay. So that GTF aimed to increase the tiger population across the various different range countries. So the declaration aims to promote a coordinated, comprehensive approach to tiger conservation across all these various areas. So these are your 53 tiger reserves designated, delineated state-wise. So here you have an estimated population of 3167 as per the latest census data. Here, always suggested to take a look at it state-wise. That will be easier to account for, easier to recall as well. Now, in order to carry out this census, which is done every 4 years, now in order to do that process, you have various different mechanisms, etc., which are carried out. And also, by the way, for the purpose of conservation, these tiger reserves, they are also given a kind of an accreditation rating, and that accreditation rating is that of CATS. What is the full form of this? That is Conservation Assured Tiger Standards. So this is basically accreditation given to the reserves to indicate standardized conservation methods. Conservation methods. Okay, that is basically observed in this particular situation. Now here, as I told you, in order to carry out census, in order to carry out the counting, how is it that the counting of the wildlife is done? So earlier, the tiger population would be counted with the help of the pug marks that they had, the paw marks. Now, with the help of that, that is where you have a kind of the counting. Now, there the problem is that you can have this double counting, which can also happen. That the same tiger can be counted, but then all these tigers, they have a very different pug marks, because, for example, all of us, we won't have the same size of our palms, is it? So that is where the pug mark counting initially would be relied upon. Now, after that, you also have the case where um, camera traps were utilized. Now, what are those camera traps? So, camera traps are basically the motion sensor devices where, if let's say an animal or there is any kind of motion happening, so they are tied to the trees. These are the cameras that are tied to the trees, and the entire setup is tied to the trees. So, any organism or any kind of movement which happens in front of them, it starts clicking pictures immediately. So, that is what is referred to as a camera trap. So with the help of the camera trap, also the tigers would be counted, because each of the tigers would have their own very unique method or unique pattern of the stripes. No two tigers have the same pattern of stripes, even though from the outside appearance they might appear to be the same. But if ever you have been on a kind of a jungle safari or a wildlife safari, you would also know, or you would also have seen that how, just by taking a look at a tiger from a far away distance, by taking a look at its face, the forest officials, they are able to designate, they are able to differentiate that this is that tiger, this is XYZ tiger, based upon the facial markings that they have, or the markings across the body. So that is where the camera traps were used. But there also, in order to add further more credibility to the census data, because even whenever that census data is released, you will have your own set of skeptics who will say that this is a kind of a miscalculation. There is no way that you can have so many tigers. And that has been observed since when 2006 census data was released, when 2010 census data was released, 2014, 18, every time this was the same case. So this year also, you have the same thing. So from the last tiger census, that is around 2018 onwards, you have M stripes, which has been significantly used. And what is that? CAT-RAT is also one of those methodologies. So that is the intelligence camera trapping method. So here, M stripes is short for monitoring system for tigers, intensive protection and ecological status. It is a software based monitoring system launched across the Indian tiger reserves by the Indian government's NTCA way back in 2010. So it has found implementation in the various different census data figures. Okay. Now, then you have the Project Elephant as well. Now, Project Elephant, we have celebrated 30 years for the completion of Project Elephant, and you had the president inaugurating that 30-year celebration when she went over to the region of Kaziranga. So that is where that Project Elephant was, and the 30-year celebration was embarked upon. Now, elephant population. Now, here also you have various different varieties of elephant, various different genetics of elephant. Here you have the Asian elephant. In the region of Africa, you have the larger ones of those, the larger relatives of those. Those are the African elephants. Then you have a smaller one of those, very unique quality. That is what is found in the region of Sumatra, where their size is particularly small. Right now, that is the region where you will find elephants even in the densest of the jungles out there. So these elephants, they need conservation, they need protection, because their population started declining significantly due to man-animal conflict, and also because of incessant hunting which was done. Large scale hunting was carried out in order to have the access to the ivory or the tusk that they have. Okay, now here Project Elephant was a central government sponsored scheme launched in Feb 1992. Ensures protection of elephant corridor and elephant habitat for the survivability of the elephants. Now, elephant conservation strategy is mainly implemented in almost all of the various different states where you will find these elephants. So, elephants are found in the eastern part of the country, the northeastern stretches of the country. Then you will find it in the central stretches, and almost all the southern states. You'll find the presence of elephants. It is protected as per Schedule 1 of Wildlife Act, and also protected from trade as per the sites. Now, Project Elephant also has seen the innovation carried out for the purpose of conservation, for the purpose of protection, where you have various different programs which have been launched in order to significantly improve and understand what are the damages. So, for example, in the case of elephants, we have already seen that the biggest harm or the biggest threat that they face is due to hunting and poaching. So, the MIKE program, MIKE is the mitigation of illegal killing of elephants. So that, or rather, the monitoring of illegal killing of elephants, that is regarded as the MIKE program. This is for mitigation for the elephant killing, so that the elephants, they don't get killed in large quantities. So here, this was started as an initiative after the Conference of Parties resolution of sites. So here also you get an idea about the role that the sites plays. Now, the aim of MIKE is to provide information required by the various elephant range countries, that where is it that the hunting and poaching is happening, what is the trend analysis of those. So to measure the levels and trends in the illegal poaching and ensure changes in the trends of the conservation, factors responsible for such changes, and then the decisions accordingly would be conveyed to the sites, and sites could take appropriate decision. For example, whether the killing is happening while they are migrating, the killing is happening and after that it is immediately traded, where is it that all these illegal trade is reaching into. So all that is analyzed as per this particular program. So you have various different elephant reserves under the MIKE program. Okay, as of now, how many different elephant reserves that we have across the country? Any idea? What is the total amount of elephant reserves that we have? So that also you can have an access to that from the same website, right? So the latest elephant reserve which has been added is the Terai Elephant Reserve. Terai Elephant Reserve. This is the latest edition. It is situated in the foothills of the Shivaliks. Here you will find rhinos also, tigers also to be found. So this will include the region of the Katarnia Ghat Reserve that you have in the northern part of Uttar Pradesh. All those areas would be included in this. Okay. Then we come across the aspect of lion reintroduction or lion relocation. So here when we talk about lions, at one point of time, few years back, or a couple of centuries back, if you can consider, or even 1 century, more than 1 century back, you had the central portion of India and significant portions around the region of Bandipur and those drier areas of southern India as well. They included significant population of Asiatic lions. In India, you find Asiatic lions in existence. Now, these Asiatic lions, now, obviously, there is not enough genetic diversity. So, genetic diversity means when you have different kinds of genetics available. So, you don't have enough genetic diversity in the case of lions. So, that is why it was always understood, it was always realized that either spread the lions in various areas, then you can carry out their protection and conservation, or you can introduce the various genetics. So basically, we cannot introduce the various genetics of lions in India now. So always advisable to shift the existing lions and spread it over to increase their resilience and sustainability. Because it can always happen that if all the lions are concentrated in the same region, they can get impacted by the diseases and any kind of diseases. We have taken the example of the CDV, the canine distemper virus, which wiped out a population of more than 1,000 African lions at one go in the Serengeti region of Tanzania. So similarly, you can have a kind of a viral infection, a kind of a disease impact. So that can influence a lot of this lion population in general, isn't it? So that is where you need to relocate or reintroduce these lions. That has always been understood as a priority. So these are the various different areas possible for relocation and reintroduction of lions. Now, the reintroduction purpose of it, I will write it down so that you don't forget. It is easier for you to revise as well. The purpose of reintroduction is to increase the resilience of the species of lions, okay, and also here, why? Because the lions in India lack genetic diversity. So these lions being concentrated in one particular area makes them vulnerable to various aspects. So Asiatic lions concentrated in Gir forests exposes them to vulnerabilities like diseases, etc. Even a large scale panic struck when you had a disease, when it was understood that COVID as a virus could also be transmissible to the lions. That also struck a large amount of panic. Now, in the region of the Gir, so in the Gir region, they have been found for a long time. So the local tribe, which is the tribe to be found in the Gir region? Good, Raj. So it is the, yes, good, Rajesh. So it is basically the Maldhari tribe. Maldhari tribe is what you find in the region of the Gir. So Maldhari tribesmen, they have always continued to coexist along with the lions. So there they do know, okay, how to live with the lions, and they don't damage the lions. They don't pose threat to the lions as well. Now, that Maldhari tribe, now it is in that area where you will also find the very unique ecosystem, what is referred to as the bunny grasslands. So these lions, they always like a kind of a drier, semi-arid region. You will never find lions in the dense of the forests. In the dense vegetation, you will never find the presence of lions. Why? Because they do require a kind of an open space where they can have they can chase down the herbivores as well, the freedom of movement, etc. All of them, that is relevant for the lions as well. So these are the 6 new sites identified for the possible lion relocation in future in India. Now, this has been a kind of a step that the Gujarat State Wildlife Board and the Gujarat state government, they have been tiptoeing around it for a long period of time. Now, here the purpose is something which is manifold, or the purpose can be very different, but the perception is, as has been also indicated by the other different state governments. For example, Madhya Pradesh state government laid an allegation very recently on the Gujarat State Wildlife Board. And Madhya Pradesh said that, look, Gujarat is being overtly possessive with its Gir lions, and it is not ready to relocate them because it understands that once the lions from the region of the Gir they are relocated, it will have an impact on tourism, which is concentrated in the Gir. So that is where there has always been a kind of an inhibition. There has always been a kind of a reluctance on the side of Gujarat to provide these lions, to reintroduce and relocate these lions in various different areas. So the regions where they can be relocated ideally have to be semi-arid. So earlier the Kuno National Park was chosen as one of those possible sites for relocation. But then once it was understood that even cheetahs are going to be reintroduced in that area, immediately that was a red flag. And this went up to the level of the court, where the court ruled out against the environment ministry at that point of time. This is around a decade back, around 2012, 2013. At that point of time, India was very much planning to introduce Asian cheetahs from Iran and introduce them into India around the region of Kuno. But simultaneously, the environment ministry in 2012 was also planning to reintroduce and relocate lions into Kuno. So that is where the matter went to the court. And when the matter went to the court actually gave a handful amount of scolding to the wildlife officials and the Ministry of Environment, where it said that, and it made a judgment that, or a remark that right hand doesn't know what is happening in the left hand, to indicate that the officials, how can they allow the relocation and reintroduction to happen at the same time in the same area, where obviously they will be competing for the same available resource of food. We have seen that how in the recent past, due to cheetah reintroduction, we have experienced large scale deaths of the cheetahs. Obviously, when you reintroduce something into a new habitat, it takes some time to get settled in. So here, now the developments have happened where Gujarat has made a decision. It will not reintroduce the lions into other states. It will reintroduce it into the nearby wildlife sanctuary itself in order to ensure a larger habitable area by these Asiatic lions. Then we come to the portion of the cheetah reintroduction. Now, the cheetah reintroduction program in India, it is a kind of a process which had been initiated for a very long period of time. And these cheetahs, basically, at one point of time, they were very abundant in India, abundantly found in India. In India, you had the Asiatic cheetah. And last Asiatic cheetah officially went extinct in India way back in 1952, when it was hunted by the Maharaja of Sarguja. That is where it was hunted down, and very proudly he posed with a gun on top of the cheetah carcass. So that is where the cheetahs went extinct. But if you read the accounts during of the, or if you are interested in history and you would read the historical accounts during the time of the Mughals, you would find out that how cheetahs, they were present in such abundant quantities, and they would always be used as a hunting partner. They would be trained to aid the people in hunting. Okay, these cheetahs would be significantly trained. Now, their numbers was so significant that when the Britishers came in, now Britishers were not very pleased with the cheetah population. They didn't consider it to be a big enough hunt, an important hunt like a lion or a tiger. So, and it was not as irrelevant as a kind of a vermin. So the Britishers, what they did was they introduced, or they brought in a kind of a token price system, where you would be given a couple of rupees for an adult cheetah that you would hunt, and a few paise if you would hunt a cub of the cheetah? Obviously, when you give people money for hunting something, people would do that. So people started hunting cheetahs in very large quantities. By the onset of 1900s, already the cheetah population in India had substantially declined. It had significantly declined. That is when the Scindias of Gwalior, they took a measure, they took a step to bring about some amount of cheetahs, and some cheetahs were reintroduced at that point of time. But those cheetahs, they started running amok and they created havoc in the human settlement as well, after which order was given to hunt them all down and kill them all down. There was another attempt which was made. That also failed. So basically, it was in 1952 when the last existing cheetah in the wild that was hunted down and the Asiatic cheetahs in India went officially extinct. Since that point of time, since 60s and 70s itself, various different various different national governments in power, they have also always been mulling about reintroduction of cheetahs. As of now, you might have the commentary going around that whether we are doing the ethical thing to cheetahs or not. But this has been a measure that various different governments have long been pondering about, that we should bring cheetahs back, because greater amount of diversity that you have in the carnivore population as well, that also is significantly helpful. So that is where to bring the ecological balance into play. So they have been mulling over it. Initially, the effort was to bring the cheetahs from Iran. But when they, and Iran in the Asiatic cheetah right now is present only in the region of Iran, where also it is critically endangered. In Iran also, you don't have a large population of cheetah which is in existence. So Iran already was reluctant to supply the cheetahs. But then that very infamous case, court case happened, where the ministry was dragged to the court, that how is it that the ministry can take take the decision to reintroduce cheetahs and relocate lions in the same region. That is when Iran also panicked and took a back step. Iran said, we will not give cheetahs to you because you yourself are not sure what to do with the cheetahs. And that is when it went into cold storage. So we could not introduce the Asiatic cheetah. Then came the help from Namibia, the African cheetahs. Now, African cheetahs are slightly different as compared to Asiatic cheetahs, because in many parts of Africa where they are to be found, now during the time of the winter in certain areas, for example, in South Africa, it gets substantially colder. So that is where many of these cheetahs, in order to withstand that winter season, they develop a very thick coat of fur. So it is during these months that they start developing the coat of fur ideally. Now these cheetahs, basically, they which have been brought to India earlier, you had a set of cheetahs being brought from Namibia, then you had another set of cheetahs being brought over from South Africa. Now all of these African cheetahs, now many of, in total around 9 of them have died. Now, there have been various reasons for the deaths that we have already talked about last week. That be it from the growing of the fur, the development of infections that happen, the collar giving them bruises, and in that fur, the amount of microbes, along with the rainy season, that has given rise to septicemia, causing a septic infection, and that has led to the death in a couple of cases. Then the internal fights among the cheetahs, that has damaged the internal organs, which has created deaths in a couple of more cases. So there have been various different cases of death. But nonetheless, the program, if it continues, unless and until due to enough pressure, the government is forced to stop the program. If the program continues, the plan is to bring forward or continue to introduce around 10 to 20 cheetahs every year. It is assumed that they will die. Whenever you introduce any particular organism in a new environment, wild environment, not in a zoo, in a wild environment, the expectation is always that there will be a kind of a decline in population. Initially, they will take some time to adapt. But continuously, the plan is to introduce around 10 to 12 to 15 cheetahs on an annual basis till their population increases to around 120, 150 odd individuals, so that they are able to reproduce and sustain themselves naturally. Okay, so that is the aspect of Project Cheetah. So the Asiatic cheetah was declared extinct in India in 1952 and is critically endangered species surviving only in Iran. Indian government has been attempting to reintroduce cheetahs in India since the 1960s and the 70s. But over the past decade, these plans have gained momentum. Now, initially, the attempt was to bring Asiatic cheetah, but Tehran had declined in part because of the critically low population numbers present in Iran itself. The first batch of 8 cheetahs had arrived from Namibia in September 2022, and then you had the next batch arriving from South Africa that arrived in February 2023, right? So here the quarantine period was over, and now you have the deaths also which have happened. Okay, now let us take a few of the cases of PYQs and let us discuss few of the more PYQs here. So in India, extended producer responsibility. Now, before this, let me have this announcement again. Tomorrow, you don't have the environment ecology class. That will be continued next Saturday. You will be given the timings by mail, also, it will be conveyed to you. Tomorrow, you have the compulsory language paper. You don't have the environment class tomorrow. So in India, the extended producer responsibility was introduced as an important feature by which of the following? For the first time, it was introduced by which? EPR. So we have discussed this while carrying out the discussion of the waste management. Good. Very good, guys. So it is the e-waste rules which for the first time introduced EPR. In context of which of the following do some scientists suggest the use of cirrus cloud thinning technique and the injection of sulfate aerosol into the stratosphere? So, for which of these techniques can be used? Creating artificial rains in some region, reducing the frequency and intensity of tropical cyclones, reducing the adverse effects of solar winds on Earth, reducing global warming. So I hope we are aware of the basic fact that when we have clouds, so the low level clouds, they provide some cooling, but the high level clouds which are there, they retain the Earth's heat and they continue to provide heating. Very good. So it is the reducing the impact of global warming. Sulfate aerosol would increase the albedo, increases albedo, means lesser insulation and lesser heat reaching the earth, and lesser heat reaching the planet. Okay, then in the context of which of the one of the following is the term pyrolysis and plasma gasification mentioned? Extraction of rare earth elements, natural gas extraction technology, hydrogen fuel based automobiles, and waste to energy techniques. For which of them pyrolysis and plasma gasification is something which is used? What do we understand by pyrolysis, guys? Natural gas extraction technique. Okay, so basically, I understand the logic that you applied. You saw gasification, here you saw gas, so here you matched it. How many of you followed that logic? that because it is plasma gasification and here you have natural gas extraction, so it would be correct? Please be honest enough. Okay. Yeah. So that means the entire portion of the past week, etc., that is completely forgotten. Well done, guys. So this is a very simple one where pyrolysis is what? Combustion in the absence of oxygen in limited supply of oxygen. So it is waste to energy technology. Why is there a great concern about the microbeads that are released into the environment? They are considered harmful to marine ecosystems. They are considered to cause skin cancer in children. They are small enough to be absorbed by crop plants in irrigated fields. They are often found to be the food adulterants. What are microbeads and why is there a great concern about these microbeads? We have discussed about this as well, if you recall. Yes, correct. So basically, here you will find that they are considered to be harmful to marine ecosystems. So microbeads are basically when you have the plastics in the case of the marine pollution, when they get degraded, when they significantly get disintegrated, that is when they are reduced into small microbeads. They are consumed by the marine organisms. Oftentimes they get into the respiratory tracts of these marine organisms as well, and they cause significant amount of issue. Consider the following. Which of the follow above is or are released into the atmosphere due to the burning of the crop biomass or crop or biomass residue? So here I'll give you the answer that UPSC gave, but I'm sure many of you will randomly take a guess for that answer itself. Burning of crop or biomass residue. Yeah. So majority of you are correct. The answer is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then consider the following statements. Most of the world's coral reefs are in tropical waters. More than one third of the world's coral reefs are located in the territories of Australia, Indonesia, and Philippines. Coral reefs host far more number of animal phyla than those hosted by rainforests. Which of them are correct? So again, so I think many of you are randomly clicking all the above, right? So here basically what you have is most of the world's coral reefs are in tropical waters. This is considered to be correct. Most of the one third of the world's coral reefs are situated in this region. We have also had a discussion about the coral triangle, right? We had discussed that which are the areas under the coral triangle. And coral reefs host far more number of animal phyla than those hosted by the tropical rainforest. Now, when you consider a rainforest, the species of insects in itself, that in itself is so high that basically coral reefs, they have a lesser amount of species diversity. So here you will have 1 and 2, which is correct. Which of the following statement best describes carbon fertilization? So, carbon fertilization is what? Increased plant growth due to increased concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, increased temperature of earth due to increased concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, increased acidity of oceans as a result of increased concentration of carbon dioxide, adaptation of all living beings on earth to the climate change brought about by the increased concentration of carbon dioxide. So what is carbon fertilization? Good. So here you have the increased plant growth due to the increased concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So when the concentration of carbon dioxide will increase in the atmosphere for a short duration, immediately following that, the amount of plant species, their population will grow. Now, the term sixth mass extinction or sixth extinction is oftentimes mentioned in the news in the context of discussion of what? Widespread monoculture practices in agriculture and large-scale commercial farming with indiscriminate use of chemicals in many parts of the world that may result in the loss of good native species. Fears of a possible collision of a meteorite with Earth in the near future in the manner it happened 65 million years ago that caused mass extinction of many species, including those of dinosaurs. Large-scale cultivation of genetically modified crops in many parts of the world and promoting their cultivation in other parts of the world, which may cause the disappearance of good native crop plants. Mankind's overexploitation or misuse of natural resources, fragmentation or loss of natural habitats, destruction of ecosystems due to pollution and global climate change. Yes, Sridevi, that is correct. Good. So here the correct answer is D, human induced exploitation and human induced extinction. So this we have already discussed about the mitigating the impact of or where is it that carbon sequestration can be carried out. So that is where we'll restrict the session here today, and next Saturday when we meet again we will continue with the portion of international conferences on the environment, and we will carry on the discussion after that. Okay, so that is all from my side for today. I hope the session has been fruitful for you. So please do revise. And next weekend, that next Saturday that we meet, we will carry on the further discussion of the international conferences. We'll discuss about the Kyoto Protocol, etc. And we will also be indicating about the portion of the aspect of environmental impact assessment. That is something we will take a look at. Okay. Good. Inderpreet, Sridevi, and Avni and Pooja. Very good. Gulam, you are persistently there or thereabouts, but there is a scope for improvement. So that is where we'll restrict the session here, guys. Thank you for all the patience. And till we meet again, take care of yourself. Goodbye and good night.